life is no thrill. It's worse than nil. So draw the right conclusion. Let them be still.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 79 of the Exploring Antinatalism Podcast, a podcast showcasing the wide range of perspectives and ideas throughout antinatalism as it exists today, through interviews with antinatalist and non-antinatalist thinkers and creators of all kinds, now running 4 years strong. I'm your host, Amanda Oldfan Sukenick, and today I'm speaking with the author of the new book, Life is Not Good Ethical Antinatalism and Haiku, Dan Dana. Welcome to the Exploring Antinatalism Podcast, Mr. Dan Dana. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Great to be with you. Appreciate it.
The pleasure is all mine. So, Dan, once or twice a month, I do like a routine sweep of Amazon.com in all languages that I possibly can for new books on antinatalism. And, some months nothing shows up. Some months a lot of stuff shows up, and a couple of months ago, I was greeted to the happy appearance of your book, your new book, Life is Not Good Ethical Antinatalism in Haiku. And it's a lovely work. It's a lovely short work, a collection of some stories from your life in prose, but also a really great collection of poems about haiku, about antinatalism, but also about other subjects as well. Sort of like, I really love how there's sort of this progression of seeing what happens to animals, the stories from your childhood, a realization, coming to, an understanding of atheism, and how that led you to antinatalism. And it's a very, very candid, beautiful work. And so I was really excited to have you on today to learn more about it. Yeah, absolutely. So I just like to begin by basically asking, as I ask some version of to all my guests, who is Dan Dana? I'd just love to learn a little bit more about you. What brought you to start writing, and I'd love to know more about your history a bit.
Okay. Well, I'm 78 years old, but I'll be brief, not tell my whole life story. And I've thought about how to answer that question because I've seen you on this before. I discovered fairly early in life that I'm what you might call a high empathy person. And as a kid, I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know if I was any different from other people. I was just a kid. I grew up on a farm in Missouri, and we had the things that farmers do, including working cattle. We have cows, and we would round up the calves each year, and we would do what's called working the cattle. And that involves some very painful things to the cattle. Dehorning was worst. It's the vocalization, the screaming or bellowing of the calves was just gut-wrenching for me. I was in charge of keeping the branding fire hot so that the red-hot branding iron could be applied, of course, and that caused pain. And so I was just very distressed about the pain that we were causing these gentle animals, these lovable animals of cattle. And so as I was proceeding in age into teenage years, my assumption was that I would just grow up, get married, have kids, be a farmer, continue the transition or the progression of our family life, family history. And I began to get very worried that I just could not do this. I just could not participate in basically the torture of these animals that I was very fond of. And so I started looking for some other occupation and wound up going into psychology and mediation, which was my practice field throughout my career. Another thing happened in my teenage years. I grew up on a rather Christian, traditional Christian community, which most in the Midwest of the U.S., that's quite typical. And so, and that was just my worldview. I just learned that was, and I had never met an atheist. It just didn't occur to me that there could be such a thing. And then when I was around 15 years old, I stumbled upon, or some little evildoer passed along to me, a book by Bertrand Russell just short snippets of Bertrand Russell's philosophy, which of course was atheistic. And it just struck me like a brick that this makes so much more sense than what I was hearing in Sunday school. And so I began calling myself an agnostic at that point, meaning you don't know for sure. And then as time went on, I went off to college and I learned some things about science and the scientific method of learning about reality through scientific method. And so gradually by the time I was in my early 20s, I was out of the closet as an atheist. And that seemed like a bold move given the context of where I came from. But over the course of my life and career, it has been just a part of me. In my business life, I didn't make a point of saying that I was atheist, but in my teaching and my training in mediation, I used evolutionary psychology as sort of the foundation for the theory building about how mediation works. How do you get people to agree about things that they've been disagreeing about? So I spent my career in that. Then I retired about 10 or 11 years ago. And that allowed me the time to do some things that I've been interested in doing for decades. One is I wrote a little book about atheism, and the title is The Reason of Revolution, Atheism, Secular Humanism, and the Collapse of Religion. Kind of an aspirational book, hoping that it will collapse someday under the weight of its own illogic. And then about 3 years ago, and I've never written poetry. I wrote some books in my field, but I had never written poetry. But I stumbled upon haiku, and specifically haiku quintets, which is a modification of traditional Japanese haiku. So the 17 syllables in a 5-7-5 structure poem wasn't enough space for me to say something that I felt was meaningful. So I expanded that to 5 haiku under one umbrella that was topical. So as you'll be sharing with the audience, I've written, I think 389 of them as of now. They're all on my website if people would like to come visit. So that's been an art form and a hobby that I've been doing now for a few years. And it's just, it's fun to do. And it's a way to say some things using poetic tools like symbolism and metaphor and ambiguity that I find enjoyable. So that's basically what I do with myself these days.
No, thank you for that lovely overlay of or overview of your history. Pardon me. I hadn't realized you'd written quite that many haikus. That's quite extraordinary. Although I did poke around on your website a little bit, and you've really done quite a lot of work. The link, by the way, will be below. So that everybody, I do absolutely invite everybody to go check out Dan's website and check out more of his books and poems on the site. We'll return to some things about animals and also atheism in just a bit, but just for now, I'd love to ask you sort of just why are you an antinatalist?
Well, why am I an antinatalist? And I truly am one. I'm not equivocal or not uncertain about this. A science that I've become interested in. I wasn't trained in it professionally, but I've done a lot of reading and learning about cosmology, which gives kind of a beyond the human scale of time and space, consider the grand scale of the universe. And of course, we're just a tiny speck of insignificance in time and space, considering the dimensions of the universe. So that's just an intriguing idea to me. And of course, it's a science-based atheistic worldview. Like we have no special significance in the world. There's no deity out there that's thinking about us, and there's no afterlife to follow. So that's oddly kind of a comforting worldview for me. I've forgotten your question. Say your question again, please. I am 78 years old, so I'm permitted to forget questions.
You're fine, Dan. Don't you worry. No, I just love to hear a little bit about why you're an antinatalist.
Okay, so I began to think about the balance of pain versus pleasure. Not just in my own life. I consider myself quite fortunate I was born in 1945. I've lived in the golden age of human history, as far as I can tell. Just the comforts, the safety, the pleasures that have been available to me in my lifetime are just unequaled in the history of Homo sapiens. And so the pain and pleasure balance is something that I began to think about, because, being a high empathy person, I am very aware of and cognizant of the suffering that goes on in the world, not just humans, even though there's a lot of it in humans, the Holocaust, the slave trade, all kinds of, wars and things that are just making me cringe to think about what's going on, even as we speak. The war in Ukraine going on, for example, right now, and there's so much more, the starvation in the world. So that pain just, I, as Bill Clinton said, I feel your pain. That's in some sense very real for me, maybe more than other people, I'm not sure. And so the suffering is just very troubling. And so I thought, well, what would make life, any pleasures that we might have in life, outbalance or compensate for all that pain? And so it seems to me nothing, no amount of joy or pleasure or happiness that I might have could compensate for the pain and suffering that's going on a much larger scale than just my privileged life, or those of us who share the privileges of the circumstances that we're born into have. And so it just began to, it seemed like a radical idea. I by the way, I did not learn about antinatalism from some other source. I just kind of evolved my own worldview that, it would be better if life had never even occurred, given the span of time and space that in which suffering has happened. And so I guess it's the becoming aware of the balance between the scale of pain and suffering, and on the other side of the balance scale is joy and happiness and fun and so on. There's just no comparison. So in an absolute sense, it would be better if there were no life in the universe. Now, I think there probably is sentient life in the universe from a cosmological point of view, but none that we know about for sure. But certainly on this planet, we would have been better off if we had been like Mars. And, whether life ever existed on Mars, we don't know for sure, but it's not there now. And so I wrote a haiku about Lucky Mars that kind of makes that point. This title is Antinatalism. We seldom ask why life's bowl of tasty cherries enjoyed by so few. Pain trumps pleasure on world's unbalanced balance sheet. Ask evil's victims. Animal cousins suffer death by predator or meat factory. Evolution's tool, pain serves genome's goal, not ours, in life's lethal game. Ethicists debate. Consensus does not mean truth. Paradigms can shift.
Yeah, no, I myself am also a very suffering-focused antinatalist. That is sort of really the core of my own antinatalism as well. That's really, quite interesting to hear that you're somebody who kind of came to these ideas on your own, and that is the story of like so many of us, right? Like we've had these inklings of these ideas since we were kids, or it formulated later in life, but there's been no word for it. Like we can't find each other until we've had the internet. When would you say was the first time that you heard about antinatalism, and what was that first
Probably just in the last 5 years. So it's been really very recent that I've been aware that there's such a thing, that there's such an animal called antinatalism. I just kind of evolved my own sense of, wow, the suffering is so much. How can a happy life of mine compensate for that or justify that? So it's been a rather very recent discovery. And of course, once I had a word for it, then I did some Googling and found out about you and your good work. I thank you, by the way.
Thank you very much, of course.
Sentient creatures worldwide, I thank you for your work.
Oh, thank you, Dan. It's my absolute privilege to do what I do with antinatalism. Do you feel like, well, I'm sure your answer to this is probably yes, but I mean, I'd love to hear a little bit more of your thoughts on like how antinatalism, should inform the way we treat animals. I mean, has your what you witnessed and had to be engaged in as a child, like how has that influenced your thinking on animal rights, further? Have you proceeded into vegetarianism or veganism, perhaps because of it? I'm sure you probably know a great deal of antinatalism. Antinatalists are vegan, are very heavily involved in animal rights. There's even a whole subcategory of antinatalism called vegan antinatalism. It's very much double focus. So yeah, what are your feelings on that?
I think veganism is a natural consequence of this thinking, that it's and I have never killed an animal knowingly, even though I grew up on a farm and other people would come out to the farm to go hunting. I have never killed an animal. I am somewhat ashamed to say that I'm not vegetarian, and here's my rationale for that. If I had been a vegetarian and foregone the pleasures of eating meat and chicken and so on, which I eat very little of, by the way, but then I do sin in that sense, that if I had been a vegetarian my entire life, it would not have made a difference in how many chickens were killed or beef animals were killed. The industry, the food industry, would have just gone on whether little Dan Dana existed out there as a consumer or not. So that, I can understand people would disagree with my reasoning there, because it's a violation of my own principles, you might say, that we ought to be vegetarian as a society, as a human population. I guess the pessimism is my calculation is that it wouldn't have made any difference in the suffering of any particular animal if I had foregone the eating of meat and chicken.
Yeah, I mean, I've been a vegan for 8 years now. It took me a long time to do it too. It was a very difficult switch for me. I do have to disagree with you. I mean, I think anytime we vote for it with our wallets, that does directly impact the lives of actual animals. But it's like I said, it's especially when you've to do it later in life is a challenge. I definitely encourage you. But yeah, I mean, it's you would definitely say that people should if they could, right?
Absolutely, and I agree with you in principle. It's just that I'm too lazy and selfish.
I'm not judging you. No worries. And what do you feel like? I mean, I certainly feel like atheism and antinatalism are sort of natural bedfellows, just like animal rights and antinatalism. Although, there is a long history of Christian antinatalism. Antinatalism does show up in other religions, which is very fascinating. It's a sort of a long, fascinating history. But yeah, I mean, what do you sort of think that antinatalism is kind of a missing piece in, because I really feel like, well, let me start again. I feel like we still haven't really dealt with the fact, it's just that there is no God. Like it's still something that people really haven't contended with. And I sort of do feel like antinatalism is a missing piece of getting people there. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I identify with a secular humanist worldview. The secular part of that is atheism. That is, there's nothing supernatural out there. There's no deities. There's no afterlife. And science is a way just to try to study and understand nature, whatever form that takes. So I'm a secular humanist. The humanist part is just caring about the well-being of others.
Yeah.
Whether humans or animals or any other sentient creature. I guess it's the sentience, the capacity to feel pain, which is the criterion for behaving humanistically. The title is The Most Moral Choice. Most living things die by being eaten alive by a predator. Selfish genes don't care about our petty comforts, only our species. Pain evolved to serve the survival of our breed. at each one's expense. What is life's virtue if its price is suffering of sentient creatures? Our most moral choice: bring no new life to the world. Break trauma's cycle.
One of the things in your book that I loved seeing was you gave a lot of really very generous and lovely shout outs to Antinatalism International, which is a group that I am a co-founder of. So thank you for that. And
Thank you for that.
Oh, my pleasure. And I always, from the very beginning of my antinatalism, have considered all forms of art to be, one of the most important and probably most effective forms of antinatalist activism that we have. And so I was curious, like, what your feelings are on antinatalist activism. Do you consider your book an act of antinatalist activism? And I just would love to hear any thoughts you have on, the application of art towards ethical ideas. Like,
right. I consider myself an armchair activist for antinatalism, for atheism, for humanism. I don't write letters to the editor. I don't go out on protest walks and so on. But I'm very much out there now with whatever art I produce, my writing, to maybe strike a chord with people that are open to the idea. I'm a member of a secular humanist group here in Sarasota, Florida, where I live. It's called Humanists of Sarasota Bay. And we're a fairly active community of, between 50 and 100 people. And we meet in various ways, but twice a month. And so it's a group of secular humanists who are out of the closet atheists almost entirely, also very left-wing politically, which, if you know anything about the politics of Florida, we are a small segment of DeSantis's world here.
It's getting a bit dangerous, do that
right.
in Florida.
Well, but the community that we have, we can speak freely and openly among our fairly wide selection of friends on such matters. So I've spoken of antinatalism in that group, and for the most part, people say, "Well, yeah, that makes sense." There are a few people who kind of challenge, but you mean life is not good? Well, they just kind of are still stuck with this Christian idea that life is by its very nature a gift of God, and it's we should cherish life, but generally there's support for that here among this small community, and so I can speak freely about that, and I can write about that. I write many of my 389 haiku. I actually have an anti-natalist theme in them. The 6 that were being shared with your group today are just a subsection of those. And many of them also are atheistic, promoting secularism, anti-mysticism, science, just science-based learning. Title is Nature's Killing Machine. Being begets pain. Our planet hosts misery. Birth damns us to life. Food animals live lives of torture and torment, endless holocaust. Human hierarchies bring wars, tyrants, hunger, death, wielding leaders' club. I am a tiny cog in nature's killing machine, evolution's craft. Does joie de vivre outweigh constant suffering on life's balance scale?
I mean, a point that I've made a lot over the years is, antinatalism is this incredible playground, as far as creativity goes, because it just really hasn't been explored creatively a lot. And I feel like I get that sense in your work, especially after what you just said, like so many of your poems, that the topic is kind of creeping in, right? Like it's not just the 5 that you wrote or that you shared with that will be part of this interview today or that appear here. It's like it just kind of gets in there. And so once you start working with the idea, it gets into everything that you do, I find anyway.
Right,
So
right.
yeah, it's exciting. I think I can't remember honestly. Forgive me if you touch on it in the book at all or in any of your other poetry, but it's obviously antinatalism is about the subject of starting lives. How do you feel that informs, especially as an atheist, the topic of the right to die? Do you have any strong feelings about that?
Well, I'm equally active about that, about the choice. The way I put it is, my life belongs to me. It does not belong to a church. It does not belong to the government, and it doesn't even belong to the medical community. So I'm an outspoken advocate for what's called rational suicide. That is, if I decide, hopefully without any kind of mental problems that might contribute to pessimism, but if I decide that the remainder of my life, the foreseeable future of my life, is one that is just going to be too uncomfortable and I don't want to live, then I have the right to end my life, and I would choose to do that in a peaceful, nonviolent way, but it is my right. So I very much support Exit International and the Swiss option, if none is made available in this country. I'm 78. I'm healthy. I look forward to a number of years more, and my wife is the same age, and we're on the same page about this. So I'm very much an advocate of the right to die, the assisted. And there's two schools of thought about that, if I might just elaborate just a bit. Some people say the law should be changed to permit assisted suicide, and I support that. But I go further than that. And so even if I can't find legally assisted dying, then I still support the choice to die, because I can imagine, I think as most rational people could, you can imagine a situation where you might not have a terminal illness, you might not have been diagnosed with 3 months to live or whatever the criterion is, but you say, because of an ongoing chronic pain or because of just miserable circumstances that you don't find a way out of, you say, I've had a good life, thank you very much, I'll end it here. And so I support the choice to do that.
Excellent. Very happy to hear that. Well, may you and your wife stay healthy and whole for as long as possible, but very, very happy to hear you use the words rational suicide. I think that's a term that's not used enough. Do you feel that should apply to, anybody at all or most ages? I mean, should that only apply to, people who are in their elder years, or, we didn't ask to be here. There's no deity in need of us. I mean, should people be able to make that decision at any time?
Well, I think we have no moral obligation to live out our natural lives. I would, if it's people early in life, I would think, have you given it a chance yet to be kind of a rewarding experience? One of my haiku has to do with my freshman year in college. I was quite discouraged. I felt like I was failing academically. I was failing socially. I was very, very shy. I was failing with women. I just didn't seem to have a way to meet the ladies that I had urgings for. And so I thought, I'm just, I'm miserable. I was just sad and lonely. And so I had an epiphany one day. Says, oh, I could end my life. Wow, what a great idea. So at that moment, you might say, I chose to end my life. But I asked myself, well, when do I want to do this? Not today, not tomorrow, and I still haven't found that right time yet. But in principle, the fact that I have the right to end my life if the future seems just not worth living, I do have that right. I would worry about kids, who with my age, who would just get so discouraged because of the temporary failures, not be able to have a perspective that life can actually be quite good, and mine has been. As it's, I've been very fortunate to not suffer the horrors of death and misery and pain that many people have. So I've had a good life, and I hope to have a few more years of good life. And I would hope that young people would give themselves a chance. Now that they're here, it might be an imposition on you that you were born, you didn't ask for this, but while you're here, to give life a chance to be kind of a fun experience, a good experience. But if not, you have the right at any age to end it.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it sure. I mean, you give it a chance, see how it pans out a little bit, maybe. But if I think anybody at any age, if they're really serious about it and really want to go, they should be allowed to go for sure. But yeah, as you were saying, death is the easiest thing to procrastinate on, but it's the option you most want in your pocket when you need it, right? It's just
Right.
When it's time, you want the option for it to be time. So yeah, so thank you so much for all your thoughts on that. I really appreciate that, Dan.
Sure.
Another thing that I just found extremely candid, in the book, and in other poems that you've written is, you're very open about being an antinatalist parent, an antinatalist grandparent. And by the way, if this is too personal at all, I can cut all this out. But there's
I'm an open book.
okay. Thank you so much. But I mean, it's something that I think increasingly more people are coming out and being able to express. But it's pretty recent. I mean, there's a couple of fairly famous antinatalist parents, like Danny Shine is probably the most famous example. He's an antinatalist in the UK. Who has 3 children, but for the most part, I mean, most parents that might be antinatalists are very afraid to talk about this. It's a very, very taboo subject, and so I would just really love to hear sort of your experience. I mean, it's sort of a rarefied experience, and I really want to thank you for sharing it with the rest of us.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I have one daughter who was now 50 years old, born when I was 27. I did not even have these thoughts at that time in life. I was just a kid, blundering through life, and my daughter happened, and then she has got married and has 2 kids who are my grandchildren, who are in their 20s, and they're living good lives. They're college students. We're all atheists, by the way, so I was able to transmit secularism to my daughter and to my grandchildren. So there's no dispute about that. So I don't regret having a daughter, and I don't regret having the grandchildren. If I had been fully cognizant of the big picture, the cosmic dimensions of things, I might have said, well, that's a selfish choice, but she happened, and I'm glad that she happened, and I'm glad that my grandchildren happened. And we can talk about this subject, by the way. I mean, we're quite able to communicate. So on this subject, my father had 8 children. I'm the youngest of 8 with 3 wives. And he was quite old when I was born. He was 71 years old when I was born. His first child was born in 1899. So there's a 46-year spread between his first kid and his last kid. Well, the 8 of us, I have 2 full siblings and then 6 half siblings. The 8 of us have procreated quite profusely. Now, I have just 1 daughter and 2 grandkids, but my full brother and my full sister both had 4 kids. Each of them has had 4 kids. They have great grandkids now. And of course, from the earlier wives, there are, I have not done the count, but it's dozens, if not a few hundred cousins who are the descendants of my father. Now, it is quite likely that in the far future, there will be catastrophes in this planet. There have been asteroid strikes, there have been snowball Earths, there have been, climate catastrophes that cause death and suffering on a scale that we just aren't familiar with. There's a very good chance that descendants of my father will experience the last human experience on the planet before it gets vaporized by the expanding sun in about 5 billion years. Now, they won't look like humans because we'll probably go through a whole series of speciation changes over the billions of years to come. But the people who are descendants of my dad will exist because of him. If he had chosen or somehow didn't have kids, then those people who suffer those times would not have occurred. So it's just a kind of a cosmic thought that when we have kids, looking at the cosmic time dimension of, Homo sapiens is about 300,000 years old. Our nearest chimpanzee common ancestor is about 7 million years. And that's just a blink of an eye in the history of life on the planet, which goes back almost 4 billion years. So, change happens. And over the course of the coming several billion years, there will be horrific things happen to sentient creatures that are us and descendants of us, as well as all these other kinds of animals that'll go through speciation and other kinds of changes. So I guess my riff here is that there are going to be millions and millions and millions of individual sentient creatures, human and semi-human, that descended from my father. And so it's a shame. It's a shame that will happen. Now, he didn't know what he was doing. He was a creature of the culture at his time, and he had kids because that's what you're supposed to do, as most of us do. But the unfortunate consequence is that he will have populated the planet with, thousands or millions of generations of descendants who will suffer terrible things. And it's just a sad thought. There's nothing to do about it other than try to limit population now, discouraging people from having kids unless they truly want to. If you want to have a kid, it's your choice, your free choice, but just be aware of the consequences. My relief generation, nearing the handoff of my lap with the baton, your turn has begun. Our stories passed on, distant past to far future, one life at a time. Shrouded in folklore, memory's fleeting half-life decays to nothing. Save this slim box of Pappy's memory snippets for your relievers. As future unfurls, preserve your lapse key moments. The relay goes on.
Yeah, I mean, given what our long-term projected future very likely will be, this horrific sort of natural extinction or unnatural extinction, however we want to call it, antinatalism really kind of seems like the most important tool to sort of prevent that.
Right.
And so, I mean, in your opinion, what does the future of antinatalism look like? What would you want it to be? Do you consider yourself an extinctionist? Do you hope that this will be something that all of humanity will come to an agreement on, and we'll just go quietly out, through an act of non-procreation? Do you think that antinatalism should have political aspirations of some kind? Yeah, what are your feelings on all of that?
Well, I think I agree with you on all of that. I would hope that religiosity, or the mythology of religion, will gradually diminish over time under the weight of its just illogic. I mean, there's no evidence for it. Even Christians will say, what's the evidence for God, or what's the evidence that there's this heavenly afterlife? Well, there's zero evidence, as Carl Sagan said so well many years ago. So just the illogic of it, the irrationality of it. We look back at religions like the so-called Greek mythology, what we call Greek mythology, from which Christianity evolved, as a history of ideas. And so we think of that as, this quaint thing. Those silly people didn't have any better idea. They believe in these crazy gods. Well, exactly. There's absolutely no more evidence for the Christian God or the Muslim God, the Abrahamic religions or whatever. There's absolutely no more evidence for that than there was for Zeus and Thor and the other religions that we think of as just a quaint mythology that those ancient ignorant people had. So I would like to think that eventually education, especially science education, will become so standardized and universal that people will just say, of course not. I mean, it's just silly. We don't, you wouldn't have that thought. And antinatalism then is a natural outgrowth, I think, of secular humanism. If you care about the well-being of sentient creatures, And if there's no God involved, that's you're doing his bidding or whatever, then the natural consequence is that we would just antinatalism would be the prevailing moral philosophy. It won't happen in my lifetime, but maybe yours.
I don't think it'll happen in my lifetime either, if it ever happens, but I certainly hope so. I think that it would be, I honestly do think that if antinatalism fails, it will be one of mankind's greatest tragedies. I really do, because it's
Right.
such perfect prevention. It's such an easy thing to just stop, to just turn the tap off,
Right.
and just make no more. So I guess we'll see what happens. But yeah,
Yeah.
all we can do now is keep talking about it, keep creating art about it,
Right.
keep pushing the juggernaut forward as much as we possibly can, in as
As
peaceful
one
way
of
as
your
possible.
guests said, the it's an old age thing. See, but vasectomy, that's the word I was trying to pick out of my.
Mhm.
No, the vasectomy is a wonderful thing, and it should be. Men should be encouraged, unless you just have a real drive or commitment to have kids. Vasectomy is a wonderful thing that's for men and for women, because then you can have sex and enjoy that just as a pleasurable activity, without the consequences of creating a life that is not going to be a happy life.
Well, especially in this day and age where there's such a profound war on women, and if I get raped in most states in this country, I can't have an abortion. They're not going to care that I'm an antinatalist, that I don't want to have kids, that I was raped and all this. I don't have those rights anymore.
Right.
I did when I was born into this country. I have most of my life. I don't have them anymore. So I would like to see men step up. I think vasectomy
Right.
should be a really
Well,
core piece of, yeah.
I think feminism, equal rights of men and women, and the recognition of the superior role that women have. I mean, I'm almost a radical feminist, and I think women should run the world. Frankly, we men have kind of blown it. So if it could be a more feminized world culture, I think the world would be a better place. And in terms of the recent political movement about anti-abortion, Christian-based opposition to abortion is awful. I mean, it's just awful what's happening to the detriment of women and men. And the best thing men can do is get a vasectomy, because otherwise you might have a kid that you're responsible for, and you should be responsible for, but you didn't keep it in your pants, or you didn't get a vasectomy. Title is Chicxulub Asteroid Impact. Big day for Earth life. 66 million years past. Brought mass extinction. Mountain-sized space rock. 30 times a bullet's speed. Smashed Yucatan's shore. Global firestorms raged. Tough birds, wee mammals eked out. Evolution worked. Big dinos perished. Pre-chicken raptors survived. And our parent shrews. Lucky us or not? Anti-natalists wonder, when's the next big day?
Well, Dan, I mean, what is next for you? I mean, I have a feeling you got a lot more haikus in you, and and I have a feeling your passion for antinatalism just keeps growing. So yeah, what
Yeah.
do you
Well,
think
the
you might do
spigot
next?
is still open on this on haiku writing. It just I enjoy the creativity of it when it pops up. Whether it's sometimes in the shower, sometimes watching a sunset. I'll have an idea and I just make a little poem out of it, and it's a fun thing to do. So I'm sure I will continue doing that. The most current thing I'm doing is I discovered I was writing my last will and testament over the last several days, kind of getting ready for the inevitable, and I have a box into which I have tossed just things from my life over decades that I will pass along to my daughter and my grandkids, And I found in there a journal, a diary that I kept for 2 years in 1968 and 69. Now, I was in Vietnam in the Army. I was not in combat, by the way. I was a very fast typist, which saved my life. So I just worked in an office. I didn't have to shoot anybody. I didn't get shot at. So I was very fortunate that way. But I did my 365 days in Vietnam, which was the standard tour at that time. And so I kept a journal, and it was just, and I had forgotten that I kept it, and I had never read it. And I picked it out of this box that I was saving for my daughter, and I said, I'm gonna just read this and see what I had to say. And it's extremely insightful into what I experienced at the time, most of which I had forgotten about, or it was covered over by a smoky haze much of the time. But I was a kind of a part-time hippie during those times and post-Army years, and so it is fascinating to see how things that I wrote about and ways that I thought in that diary are roots of the way my life has actually turned out. So that was 55 years ago. So it's just fascinating to look back on that. What I've decided to do is to transcribe it and publish a book of my writings. They were never intended to be read by anyone else, certainly not published in a book. And it's more self-revealing than perhaps it should be, but I'm not going to edit out stuff that I wish I hadn't done, or at least some people might think I shouldn't have done. And so I'm going to publish this book. So in the next 6 months or so, it'll be on my website as well. It's called, the working title is Diary of a Young Man, 1968-69.
What an incredible find.
It is. It was just
a
thing I stumbled on, which is, it's just been an obsession now the last week or so of just reading that and transcribing it and preparing it for a publication.
Beautiful, Dan. I can't wait to read that. Really, that sounds extraordinary. I'll be looking forward to that for sure.
Oh, you'll get it.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful.
My afterlife. My atoms will roam, join other earthbound life forms, mouse, bird, fish, worm, weed. As Dad, my genes will walk, talk, think, feel, reproduce in my offspring's form. My molecules float in air until Earth's end time, 5 billion years hence. Sun's suns go nova, generations of star stuff. I'm galaxy wide. As teacher writer, some wise bits may last a while. Perhaps this haiku.
Well, in the meantime, how can our audience best support your works? Obviously, you have the website. They can find the books on Amazon.com. Anywhere else? Where can people find you?
Thank you for the thought about that.
Of course.
I am retired. I'm fairly comfortably retired, so I'm not trying to make money at anything. I do want my ideas to persist. You might call it something of a legacy. So I'm interested in so I write these books. I don't really sell them. I put them on my website. They're not popular. They don't get read a lot. But if anyone would like to, and they're all also sold at a price on Amazon that's the lowest price that Amazon permits for ebooks as well as any paper books. And so I would encourage people to go to either on Amazon and look up my name, or go to my website, which is dandana.us, and poke around and just take anything you like. So just kind of sharing my ideas, my writings, and my poetry is all I ask.
Beautiful. Well, we can do that, and hopefully this interview will also live on and on. So it's another piece of the immortality, so to speak. But yeah, the links to your website will be in the description below for everybody to go find. Please go explore Dan's website. Obviously, the links on Amazon.com. Yeah, extremely reasonably priced. And a real treasure. You know, I collect antinatalist books, and so I do definitely
Right.
consider this a treasure in my antinatalist book collection. The name of the book, once again, is Life is Not Good Ethical Antinatalism in Haiku. Yeah, Dan, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for being my guest today on the Exploring Antinatalism podcast. Is there anything else you want to say as we close out?
No, just thank you for the opportunity, and let people come check out my stuff. And if you like it, I'll be pleased.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, and I hope that they will. So thank you so much again, Dan. This has been absolutely lovely.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you for listening to the Exploring Antinatalism podcast. Please follow the podcast on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Exploring Antinatalism can also be heard on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Buzzsprout, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Amazon.com, and so many other platforms. You can email me at exploringantinatalism@gmail.com. Website designed by Visions Noirs. Please follow him at www.bionoir.com and follow him on Instagram. Logo art by Life Sucks. Please subscribe to him on YouTube and check out his shop on Etsy at www.etsy.com/shop/lifesuckspublishing. Music by Mati Hairi. You can hear the whole song, Life is a Sexually Transmitted Disease with a Mortality Rate of 100%, by following the link in the description, and make sure to also read his academic paper which inspired the song, If You Must Give Them a Gift, Then Give Them the Gift of Non-Existence, in the Cambridge Quarterly of Healthcare Ethics on cambridge.org. Links below. All the best, and bye for now.
Life is no thrill compared to nil. Life is no thrill. It's worse than nil. So draw the right conclusion. Let them be still.